The chamber smelled like cooling stone and a silence that had never once been broken. Not quiet, silence is different. Quiet is what happens when sound fades. Silence is what you build deliberately, structurally, over 19 determinations until the room itself expects it. Archivist Jens Sorvath had been sitting in the gallery for 6 hours. His pen was moving. The Grand Convocation tier ran across 3 suspended platforms, each at a different height. The highest held the central dais. The middle held the senior delegations. The lowest, Tier C, a designation that meant what it was designed to mean, held the Terran Compact. From where Sorvath sat, he could see all of it. The Tier C table was directly below him and 50 meters across. No acoustic line to the recording apparatus. That had not been an accident. He had checked the original blueprint 7 years ago and confirmed it was not an accident. On the Tier C table sat a wide-based enamel flask, dented on the left side. A single strip of copper wire wound around the repair, tight and careful, catching the overhead lights. Envoy Davel Oren had carried that flask to every convocation session for 9 years. She had never once set it down. The vote was being read aloud by the session clerk, a small Velsanari official who read everything in the same flat tone regardless of content. Sorvath had always respected that. Today he found he was grateful for it. Convocation Resolution 14-7. Terran Compact Provisional Observer Status, Year 9, Month 4. The 4,412 Terran Compact registered individuals currently held at Farath Anchorage outer sectors, pending biological census review, are hereby reclassified as unregistered biological units. Authorization for termination of biological presence, 72 hours from the close of this session. Marker lights in favor. 14 of 17 marker lights came up. Sorvath noted it, 14. He wrote the number, he wrote the time. His pen kept moving because his pen always kept moving, because if the pen stopped it meant something had happened that was too large for him to immediately write, and he had told himself 9 years ago that he would not let that happen. He would write everything, all of it, while it was still happening. Grand Arbiter Selvath Khan stood at the central dais, 4 meters tall, 6-limbed, the outer 2 limbs folded at his sides in what Sorvath had learned to read as satisfaction. The copper-green color of his jaw ridge was light today, no stress, no surprise. He tapped the flat ceremonial rod on the dais once, a tradition he had introduced himself, not inherited, and the session clerk began the close. It was then that Envoy Oren set down the flask. Sorvath saw it happen. The flask went from her hand to the table surface with a sound he couldn't hear across the gallery but could see in the way the Velsanari clerk beside her went very still. Oren reached into her jacket, took out a small notepad and wrote 3 words. She tore the page. She folded it once. She walked to the convocation session clerk, on the floor level, not at the Tier C table, the one with the recording apparatus, and she handed it over without expression and walked back. The clerk read it. Read it again. Looked at Oren, looked at the paper, looked at the session record in front of him. The flask was still on the table. No raised voices, no formal protest, no answer of any kind in 19 determinations. 3 words, the clerk read them twice. The chamber had not been quiet like that in 19 determinations. Stay close, you'll want to hear what 3 words did to a room that had never once gone quiet. 9 years, 4 months, and 11 days before that moment, the kettle was already on. It had been on since 5:30. Not because anyone in Farath Anchorage Sublevel 9 needed coffee at 5:30, though most of them would drink it, but because Logistics Officer Ren Cavill had decided in the second week of their posting that the team needed to hear it begin. The sound of the kettle starting was the sound of a day that was going to be worked. It said, "We are still here." It said, "We are still doing this." The kettle was, as Cavill once put it, the only honest clock they had. Sublevel 9 had been a relay maintenance bay before the Terran Compact's Provisional Observer mission repurposed it. The cable runs along the ceiling were still there, just rerouted. The walls were the gray-green of a room that had spent 40 years being functional rather than occupied. There were 7 desks. A row of data terminals along the east wall. The logistics console against the far wall, Cavill's, which was larger than the others and covered in hand-marked reference grids she had drawn herself because she did not trust auto-generated maps for a space she needed to understand in her body, not just her eyes. Above the logistics console was a photograph. A single sheet of paper, 18 by 24 centimeters, printed on station equipment not designed for archival quality. The edges had begun to silver at the corners from 9 years of ambient humidity. The photograph showed names, just names, printed in a font small enough to fit them all, and there were 4,412 of them, in rows so tight you had to lean close to read any individual one. Ren Cavill had pinned it there the morning after the Farath Anchorage notation change. She had not looked away from it in 9 years. She had simply learned to work in its direction. The pushpin holding it to the wall was a flat-headed one, the kind that came in standard station supply kits. No one had replaced it. The team had never discussed this. They had simply, without talking about it, agreed in some way that did not require words that replacing the pushpin would feel like something. Like acknowledging the photograph might not always be there. Like imagining a version of sublevel 9 without it. The pushpin stayed. Sorveth came in at 600. He always came in at 600. He had a cup of the coffee. Cavill had started at 5:30 and he sat down at his desk, and he opened the cross-index, a document now running to 47,000 entries, and he began the previous session's log update. In 9 years, he had not missed a day. In 9 years, not one entry had changed anything. He was aware, in a way he would not have described as hope, because hope felt like the wrong word for something structural, that this was going to keep being true until it wasn't. There were 7 people on the Farath Anchorage team. Sorvath was the oldest. He had been an archivist before this posting and would be one after, assuming there was an after, which he tracked on no official document but thought about at 600 most mornings while the cross-index loaded. Ren Cavill was 47. She had spent 12 years before this posting doing logistics architecture for deep station supply chains, which meant she understood at a cellular level how systems worked and where the gaps were. She did not talk much. When she did, it was precise. She referred to the kettle as the only honest clock we have, and to the photograph as the record, and to Selvoth Khan's convocation authority as the problem, with the same flat affect she used for all 3. This was not because she didn't feel things. Sorvath had worked with her for 9 years. He knew exactly what her face looked like when she felt things. She just didn't see the point of saying them out loud when you could work instead. Dr. Thessa Andrew was 40. She had certifications in Galactic legal systems from 8 jurisdictions, which was 3 more than the convocation formally recognized and 2 more than the Asakiran Dominion knew she had. She wrote her legal filings in longhand first on actual paper with an actual pen before entering them into the system. You find what you missed when you write it slowly, she had told Sorvath once early in the posting. The fast version always skips something. In 9 years of filing procedural inquiries, she had found many things she would have missed writing fast. None of them had been answered. She had filed number 413 the morning of the vote. Elder Liaison Veth Karen was 33 and had the specific kind of calm that comes from spending your professional life talking to people who are not fully human. He had been the one corresponding with Elder Ves Oren of the Orvithkaln Elder seat for 3 of the 7 years that correspondence had run. He was the one who had noticed, around the 2nd year, that she was not asking to be informed of human activities. She was asking to be read to. She wanted the archives out loud. She wanted to hear how humans sounded when they told their own story. Karen had flagged this to Sorvath in a message that said, very simply, "She's not studying us. She's deciding something." Signal lead Asa Brendel was 31 and the quietest person in a quiet room. She spoke 4 languages, including the Asa Kiran subregister, which she had learned because no one else had, and because she had a theory that Selvoth Khan's frequency shifted under metabolic stress, and she wanted to be able to hear it. Her theory was correct. Sorvath had watched her go still in the gallery during 3 different sessions, and later, over coffee, she would say he was angry or he was uncertain, and she would always be right. She registered the Terran Compact's use of an agricultural monitoring frequency 19 months ago. She had said when Sorvath asked about it, "I'm not using it yet." And then there was envoy Davil Oren. Oren was the only member of the team the convocation ever saw. She attended every session. She sat at Tier C for 9 years looking up at the central dais, and she said nothing, and she filed nothing through formal channels, and she carried the flask to every session and never set it down during proceedings. Sorvath had asked her early on why she kept bringing it. "Because the day I set it down," she said, "I want it to mean something." He had written that in the cross-index, not as data, just because it seemed like the kind of thing that should be written down. The Farath Anchorage notation change had happened in year 9, month 0, week 2. No session, no vote, no hearing, not even a formal memo. A column in the convocation's biological census, the one that tracked registered individuals under provisional status species, had been updated. The 4,412 Terran Compact individuals held at Farath Anchorage outer sectors, pending census review, had been moved from registered provisional to pending reclassification. The update was made on a Tuesday. Sorvath had caught it on a Wednesday, which was when he ran his weekly cross-reference of the census against his own archive. He sat for a moment after he found it, just a moment. Then he updated the cross-index. He noted it to Cavill, who read his message, did not respond immediately, and 20 minutes later came to stand beside his desk. She looked at the screen. She looked at the number. She said 4,412. "Yes," Sorvath said. She nodded. She went back to her desk. Sorvath heard her open a new document. That evening she printed the photograph and pinned it above the console. He understood without asking what it was for. The census column said pending reclassification. The photograph said these were people. The column could be updated again, the photograph could not. The pushpin stayed. The next morning, Sorvath opened the cross-index and began looking for clauses. The Asakiran Dominion had authored the Sentience Accords in the Third Convocation era, a document of 2,200 clauses, ratified by all member species, covering the full range of biological rights, registration protocols, hearing requirements, and reclassification procedures. It was, by most measures, the most thorough legal framework in the Convocation's history. Selvath Khan cited it often. He cited specific clauses by number and session, occasionally from memory, as a demonstration of institutional authority. Sorvath had read it beginning to end over the first 6 months of the posting. He had read it again in year 3. In year 4, he and Andrew had begun cross-indexing it against the Terran Compact's provisional status conditions, every clause that might apply in any jurisdiction to any aspect of the team's situation. This was not officially their job. Their job was observation and diplomatic liaison. But Andrew had her 8 certifications, and Sorvath had his 9-year cross-index, and Cavil had started the kettle every morning for 4 years by then, and at some point the work had simply become what they did. Andrew had identified 847 clauses as potentially applicable. She had prepared formal filings for 61 of them. One evening, after a session, Sorvath had read back an early Dominion founding clause while Andrew was reviewing the latest batch. He read it the way he read everything, out loud, precisely, at the pace of someone who was checking his own understanding. No species may be removed from the record of the living without a hearing of not less than 14 days. He paused. 14 days. They specified 14 days in the founding document. Andrew looked up. I love these people, Sorvath said. I have always loved these people. She had laughed. It was the kind of laugh that was also something else. She went back to her filings. He went back to the cross-index. The 7 years of correspondence between archivist Jens Sorvath and Elder Vesseroran of the Orvithtown Elder Seat had begun the way most significant things begin, with something small and slightly odd. She had sent a formal data request through the Convocation Liaison channel, not unusual. Many senior members made requests of the archive. What was unusual was the request itself. She had not asked for a document. She had asked for Sorvath to read a document to her. Specifically, she wanted to hear the Terran Compact's own account of the Farath Anchorage posting, not the official Convocation record which she had, but whatever the team itself had produced. She wanted, she said, to hear it in a human voice. Sorvath had sent the request to Karen, who had flagged it as significant. She's not studying us, Karen had written, she's deciding something. Sorvath had sent the recording himself. Over the following years, they corresponded slowly, carefully, in the way of 2 people who understood that what they were building required patience above all else. She was 680 years old. She had served the Orvithtown Elder Seat for most of that. She held co-dominant standing in the Convocation, which meant her vote carried weight that even Selvath Khan could not simply override. She had voted against the Dominion bloc twice in her recorded tenure. Both times had been noted in the archive as aberrations. She told Sorvath in the 4th year of their correspondence about the 3rd colony. It had been a Drevatha colony, 4,400 individuals lost to a notation change in the Convocation census 60 years before the Farath Anchorage change. No hearing, no vote. A column updated, a colony reclassified, and by the time anyone outside the Drevatha delegation had noticed, the window for formal protest had passed. The Dominion had offered a formal acknowledgement. The acknowledgement had never arrived. The Drevatha kept their own archive of the names. Sorvath had not responded to that message immediately. He had sat with it for 2 days. Then he had written back, I understand about the names. She had written, I know you do. I can hear it in how you read. The correspondence was not the only thing Sorvath had been building. Every week, Andrew filed one more procedural inquiry through the Terran Compact's provisional status channel. Every week, it was logged, acknowledged, and placed in a review queue with an estimated response time of 18 to 24 months. In 9 years, 412 inquiries. 0 responses. She filed number 413 the morning of the vote. Every day, Sorvath ran the cross-reference. Every evening, Cavil locked the photograph in her line of sight and kept working. Every session, Oren sat at Tier C and looked up at the dais and carried the flask and said nothing and filed nothing and waited. From the outside, the Terran Compact team at Farath Anchorage did nothing at all. That was, in fact, the plan. Sorvath had read enough institutional history to know that systems like the Convocation did not watch things that appeared to be waiting. They watched things that moved, so the team did not move. They cataloged, they cross-indexed, they corresponded. They registered a frequency on the agricultural monitoring channel that no one used because nothing important had ever been sent on it. Brendel had done that last one herself, 19 months before the vote. She had told Sorvath about it the next morning over coffee. He had asked her when she planned to use it. When I need to, she said. He wrote it in the cross-index, not as data, just because it seemed like the kind of thing that should be written down. Then came the morning Cavill read Oren's message aloud. 12 minutes after the vote, 3 words on a secure relay. She read it to the room in the same tone she used for logistics updates, because that was how Cavill delivered information she needed the room to act on immediately and without reaction. Sorvath's pen went still. He had been writing when she spoke, mid-word. He looked at the still pen for a moment, which told him something important about what he was feeling, and then he looked at the clock, and then he opened the cross-index to the filings folder. Andrew was already at her desk. The kettle was already on. Round 1 took 90 minutes. Dr. Andrew had 7 filing packets ready. Each cited a different clause of the Sentience Accords, a document the Asakiran Dominion had authored, ratified, and cited in session across 3 convocation eras. Each filing was addressed to a different jurisdictional body recognized under the Accords. Each triggered, under the Dominion's own procedural rules, a mandatory 48-hour review stay on any biological reclassification order affecting the named individuals. 7 filings, 7 jurisdictions. 7 different clauses from the same document. Andrew had prepared 61. She used 7 because 7 was enough and she did not want to be wasteful. All 7 were accepted within 90 minutes. The mandatory stays activated automatically. The 72-hour termination clock was now running against a 48-hour review window that overlapped on 6 of the 7 jurisdictions, creating a procedural tangle the Dominion's own rules required them to address before any reclassification order could execute. Sorvath noted the acceptance times. He noted the jurisdictions. He noted in the margin that 54 filings remained in Andrew's folder. He underlined it. He wanted Selvathcon to know that when the time came. Round 2 began while Round 1 was still being processed. Signal lead Asa Brendel sat at her terminal and opened the agricultural monitoring frequency, the one she had registered 19 months ago, the one no one used because nothing important had ever been sent on it. She had prepared the packet 3 years earlier. She had updated it weekly. It contained the notation change record, the original census column, the vote transcript from that morning, the full list of 4,412 names, and 9 years of cross-indexed convocation status determination precedent, showing every prior reclassification, every prior hearing waiver, every prior notation change that had gone unchallenged. Timestamped authenticated. Signed under the Terran Compact's Provisional Observer status, which entitled them to use any public broadcast frequency registered to their delegation. She sent it to every non-convocation species relay in the Farath system. 39 species. Non-retractable under relay protocol. Once sent on a registered frequency, a data packet was part of the public record of that frequency. It could not be recalled. It could not be marked as unofficial. It existed now in 39 relay systems, with authentication from a Terran Compact diplomatic archivist and a timestamp that predated any convocation response by hours. Brendel closed the terminal. Done, she said. Cavill at the logistics console did not look up. Kettle's on, she said. 39 species. Brendel said it quietly to no one in particular while she was closing the terminal. 39 confirmed receipt. She paused. The agricultural frequency has a delivery log. They'll see it when they check. They'll all see it at the same time. Sorvath wrote the number. He wrote the time. He noted that the broadcast was authenticated, non-retractable, and now part of the public record of a frequency the Dominion had never monitored because nothing important had ever used it. He looked at the number 39 for a moment. Then he looked at the cross-index, at the section he had flagged 3 years ago under the header, Delivery Window Timing Required. He had been calculating the window for 3 years, 18 minutes. That was the gap he needed, documents arriving at all 3 descent block delegations simultaneously, far enough before the emergency session that they had time to read and act, close enough that the Dominion had no window to intercept or reframe the delivery. He had timed it himself. He had been timing it for 3 years. He opened the send queue. The Dravatha Secondin had lost their 3rd colony 9 years ago. No hearing, no vote. A notation change in a census column, 4,400 individuals moved from registered to pending and then from pending to nothing in the span of 2 updates. They had kept their own archive of the names. They had attended every convocation session since. They had voted no quietly on 3 resolutions. They had said nothing publicly about any of it. They had been waiting. Sorvath sent their packet first. It contained 4 documents, the Farath Anchorage Notation Change Record, the morning's vote transcript, the full list of 4,412 names, and one page pulled from the Sentience Accords. Clause 7 Keth 14, the erasure classification provision, written into the Accords after the Dravatha Secondin's own notation change, at a session the Dominion had considered too minor to send senior representation. A clause the Dominion had authored. for exactly this situation. Sorveth had found it in year 6. He had not told anyone for 3 days while he checked his reading 4 times because he was an archivist and he did not trust findings that seemed too exact. On the 4th day he had brought it to Andrew. She had read it. She had put it down, she had picked it up and read it again. They wrote this to protect themselves, she had said, from each other. Yes, Sorveth said, and it applies to us. Oh yes. She had looked at the page for a long time. How long have you known? 3 days, I wanted to be sure. She nodded, she put the clause into the filings folder under its own tab. She labeled it in her handwriting, use last. They had not used it yet, that was what Sorveth was sending now. The Velsanari Accord received their packet 2 seconds after the Dravatha Secondin. The Velsanari always attended convocation sessions in groups of 3. 1 to speak, 1 to record, 1 to watch the room. They had lost 280,000 individuals to a delisting event 60 years ago. They had been offered a formal acknowledgement that had never arrived. They had been waiting longer than anyone else in the chamber, and no one had noticed, because they were small and individually considered low status, and they always attended in groups of 3 and never raised their voices. Their packet contained the same 4 documents, plus 1 extra. A cross-index entry Sorveth had made in year 4, noting that the Velsanari descent vote record showed perfect consistency across every reclassification resolution for 6 decades. He had written in his careful archive hand a single line at the bottom, this species has been watching for 60 years. They know what they are watching for. He had included that page because he thought they should know he had seen them. The 3rd packet went to Elder Vesoran of the Orvithkaln Elder seat 18 minutes before the emergency session opened. Sorveth had written her a note, not a formal document. A note, 3 sentences in plain language. I know you have been reading us for 7 years. I know you have been deciding something. These are the documents you need. He did not know if she would act. He had never asked her to. Their correspondence had never contained a request. But he had heard, in the way she asked to be read to rather than informed, that she was not a person who needed to be told what a document meant. She needed the document. He gave her the documents. The Dravatha Secondin invoked the erasure classification provision at the emergency session through their senior delegate, a gray-blue 4-limbed official whose name Sorveth had in the archive but had never heard spoken aloud in chamber. The invocation was formal, procedurally exact, and cited the clause by number. Under convocation rules, an erasure classification provision invocation required full suspension of any biological reclassification order pending a classification determination hearing. Estimated hearing timeline under the current session load, 4 to 9 galactic years, during which time all designated individuals must be transferred to protected status. The Velsanari Accord co-filed the invocation 3 seconds later, through a separate relay independently. Neither had coordinated with the other. Both had received the same document from Sorveth's archive 4 hours before the session. They had simply read it and known what it was for. Sorveth in the gallery wrote both filing times. He wrote the 3-second gap. He wrote neither coordinated, both read. He underlined it twice. And then Elder Vesoran of the Orvithkaln Elder seat requested the floor. Selvothkon granted it. He had too. She held co-dominant standing, and a request for the floor from a co-dominant delegate was not a request he could refuse. He granted it with the tap of his ceremonial rod, the same tap he had introduced as a tradition, not inherited, and the session clerk noted the time. Vesoran was 680 years old. She had served the Orvithkaln Elder seat for most of that. She had voted against the Dominion bloc twice in her recorded tenure. Both were in the archive as aberrations. She walked to the speaking position the way someone walks when they have been composing their sentences for 7 years and have no need to hurry, because all the preparation is done and what comes next is simply the saying of it. She had prepared nothing written. She had the 4 documents Sorveth had sent her, but she did not take them out. She did not need to. She had read them 3 times on the way to the session, and she had 680 years of procedural memory, and she had been corresponding with a human archivist for 7 years. And she knew the sentience accords the way you know something you have served under long enough to see it fail. She read 3 clauses from the accords out loud. She did not read them the way the session clerks read flat, even without weight. She read them the way Sorveth had once read to her, long distance, from the Terran Compact's own archive, with the understanding of what each word had been meant to protect. Then she looked at Selvothkon. You wrote all of this, she said. I would like to know which part you intended to honor. Selvothkon's jaw ridge from the gallery had deepened to near black. Sorveth noted the color, he noted the time. He wrote in the margin, his frequency did not shift, he has not found a response yet, he is still reading. The emergency session had been called by Selvothkon 1 hour after Andrew's 7 filings were accepted. Sorveth had been in the gallery by the time it opened. He had gotten there before Oren, which surprised him, and then did not surprise him, because Oren moved without hurrying and always arrived before she was expected. She was already in her seat at Tier C when the session began. The flask was on the table. She had not poured from it. Sorvath wrote she set it down, that's the signal, she's done waiting. He had written that same phrase once before, years ago, describing what the flask meant. The day she set it down, she had told him she wanted it to mean something. He had written it in the cross-index because it seemed like the kind of thing that should be written down. Now he wrote it again in the margin of his session notes, and this time it was not a memory of a conversation. It was a record of a fact. The notepad on the table in front of Oren was open. The pen was in her hand. She was ready. Grand Arbiter Selvath Khan stood at the central dais and read. He read the 7 jurisdictional filings, each with its mandatory 48-hour stay notation. He read the erasure classification provision invocation, co-filed by 2 delegations through separate relays. He read the broadcast confirmation, 39 species, agricultural monitoring frequency, authenticated, time-stamped, non-retractable under relay protocol. He read Elder Vesoran's floor statement, which had already been entered into the convocation's permanent record before the session began, because she had handed it to the clerk as she sat down. He read it all. Sorvath counted. He counted because he always counted. Because the pen had gone still and the only thing left when the pen went still was to witness what was happening with complete attention. He counted the seconds the way he counted everything precisely, out loud under his breath, one number at a time. 11 seconds. Selvath Khan had presided over 19 species status determinations. He had introduced the ceremonial rod tap. He had built the convocation tier's acoustic architecture so that his frequency carried to every corner while smaller species struggled to be heard. He had written into the session protocol, in year 2 of his tenure, a provision allowing him to extend any deliberation window by an additional 72 hours at his sole discretion. He had used that provision 14 times. He had never needed to use it when the other side had already filed, when the mandatory stays were already active, when the broadcast was already gone and the floor statement was already in the permanent record and the co-dominant elder was already seated and looking at him and waiting. He had not prepared a response for this. In 290 years of authority, silence had meant confirmation. Every species on every lower platform that had gone quiet had, in the end, accepted the outcome. He had built his tenure on that. He had built the chamber on it. The platform heights and the acoustic routing and the frequency amplification and the subaudible register that he alone could project without effort. All of it had been built on the assumption that the smallest delegation in the room would eventually stop waiting and accept. He read the filings. He had no prepared response. Vesoran moved to the record. She had been composing this sentence for 7 years. She said it the way she had read it in her head in the 7th year of the correspondence. Quietly, without hurry, the way you say something when you are not saying it for the people in the room, but for the record that will exist after they are gone. Convocation Resolution 14-7 is procedurally non-executable, pending classification determination hearing. Estimated timeline 4 to 9 galactic years. All designated individuals must be transferred to protected status under Article 7 of the Sentience Accords, a document authored by this Dominion, ratified by this chamber, and apparently read in full by at least one delegation it was designed to overlook. She paused. I believe Envoy Oren has a destination in mind. Sorvath wrote the quote in full, he did not shorten it. He did not paraphrase. He wrote it word for word because some things should not be summarized. Below it he wrote, the 4412 stop being a number here. This is the moment they become people who are going somewhere. Envoy Daval Oren stood. She straightened the collar of her field jacket, the same jacket she had worn to every convocation session for 9 years. The same jacket she had worn on the Peridian talks before this posting, before the dent in the flask, before the copper wire. She had worn it through so many sessions that the fabric at the left shoulder had started to thin from the strap of the bag she always carried, and she had never replaced it because she had not decided yet whether it was done. She picked up the flask. She looked at Grand Arbiter Selvath Khan, who had voted that morning to reclassify 4,412 people as biological material, and who was standing at the dais of a chamber he had designed to make her feel small, and who had presided over 19 determinations without a single reversal, and who did not have a prepared response for this moment, and she spoke. She spoke clearly, into the recording apparatus, the one she had never previously had direct acoustic line to. Send them home, Earth will register every name. No ceremony, no raised voice, no speech. She sent them home, she filed the names, she sat back down. That was all. Transport authorization cleared at hour 58. The Oran's wake departed Farath Anchorage Outer Sector 3 at hour 61, 11 hours before the original termination order would have become executable. The ship had been named by the team. No one outside Sublevel 9 had ever asked about the name. It was their ship in all the ways that mattered, and they had named it after someone they had lost in the Peridian talks long before Farath Anchorage, and it carried 4,412 people home. Selvath Khan remained at the dais. He did not speak. Sorvath wrote in his notebook in the margin beside the 11-second count, "He has never been answered. He doesn't know yet that this is what it looks like." And then below it in smaller handwriting after a moment, "The 54 remaining filings are still in the archive. He will know that too in time." Back in Sublevel 9, the transport confirmation came through at hour 63. Brendel read it on her terminal. She did not say anything. She put the frequency registrations into archive status. The agricultural monitoring channel, officially closed for Terran compact use, officially logged as single-use registered and transmitted. She shut the terminal with a sound that was not quite a click and not quite nothing. Andrew filed the procedural close for all 7 jurisdictional challenges. She wrote each reference number in longhand first on paper with her pen because she found what she missed when she wrote slowly. She found nothing missing. She filed them clean. Karen sent the liaison record to the Terran Compact Diplomatic Registry, the full 7-year correspondence archive, properly indexed, with a cover note that said the relationship had been collegial and that Elder Vesoran had been a careful reader, and that he hoped whoever received the archive would treat it accordingly. He did not know if they would. He sent it anyway. Here is what Selvath Khan's record now showed as of that hour. Resolution 14-7, suspended, non-executable for a minimum of 4 galactic years pending classification determination hearing. 7 jurisdictional challenges all active. Relay broadcast 39 species authenticated irrevocable. 3 Dominion Block member species had, within 12 hours of the broadcast, formally requested a review of the erasure classification provision, the clause the Dominion had written, which the Dominion had authored specifically to prevent exactly this kind of challenge. The review request was now in the convocation's queue. 290 years, 19 determinations, 0 reversals. 1. Sorvath entered it into the convocation's permanent archive himself. He was, after all, the archivist. It was his job. He typed the entry with care. He time-stamped it to the second. He saved it under Selvath Khan's tenure record in the determinations log, and he noted that it was the first reversal in the Grand Arbiter's recorded service. He did not add any comments. The record was its own comment. Elder Vesoran found Envoy Oren in the East Access Hall of the Convocation tier after the session. The recorded corridor, it was called, the walls held plaques for every major resolution in the Convocation's history. Resolutions Selvath Khan had approved were in the majority. Oren was standing in front of one of them reading it when Vesoran approached. They stood there together for a moment without speaking. Later, much later, in a different building, talking to a junior Orvith Kaln attaché who had asked why she voted against the resolution, Vesoran said this. "Because I read their archive, all of it. 9 years of cross-index documentation, 7 years of correspondence, 4,412 names in a font small enough to fit on one sheet of paper. And I realized they were not waiting to become a problem. They were simply waiting for the right clause. In humans, patience is not a posture. It is the load-bearing wall." The junior attaché asked what that meant. "It means," Vesoran said, "that the weight was always being held. You simply could not see what was holding it." Oren's message reached the Terran Compact Diplomatic Registry from the Oren's Wakes relay at hour 66. 4 words. "Kettles on, come home." Ren Cavill read the transport confirmation, put it down, and stood at the logistics console for a moment. She was 47 years old. She had spent 9 years, 4 months, and 22 days in this room, facing this console with the photograph above it. She reached up with both hands. She unpinned it carefully. The pushpin came out clean. She held the photograph for a moment, the edges silvered, the paper lighter than it looked, the names in rows so tight you had to lean close. She did not fold it. She placed it flat inside the Oren's Wake's official archive casing, face up. She wrote the notation herself in her own handwriting because she did not want it typed. Farath Anchorage 4,412 names, not a footnote, not a precedent, people. She placed the pushpin inside the casing alongside it. Then she started the kettle. Sorvath wrote his final session entry at 2:20 the next morning. He wrote it the way he wrote everything precisely, out loud under his breath, checking each number twice. Resolution 14-7, non-executable, duration minimum 4 galactic years. Names protected 4,412. Years of preparation 9 years 4 months 22 days. Seconds of silence before the answer arrived, 11, I counted. He read it back. He saved it. He closed the cross-index, 47,000 entries, not including today's additions which he would log in the morning, and he sat for a moment in the quiet of sublevel 9. The kettle had gone cold. The archive casing sat on the logistics console, closed, the photograph inside it. The pushpin was in there too, alongside the notation in Cavill's handwriting. The console was clear for the first time in 9 years. The wall above it was bare. The indent where the pushpin had been was still visible in the surface, a small round mark in the gray-green material that had spent 9 years being functional rather than occupied. He looked at it for a moment. Then he opened a new document and began the entry for tomorrow. The photograph lay face up inside the casing, in the dark, with the names looking up at nothing and everything, as the Orin's wake moved through open space toward Earth.